Buried in the sand for 3,000 years, a piece of clay was about to rewrite everything historians thought they knew about the Bible. In a cave by the Dead Sea, in the ruins of a fallen palace, in a silver scroll rolled so tight it took decades to unroll without destroying it. These are not legends. These are objects you can walk up to today in museums in Jerusalem, London, and Istanbul and touch with your own eyes. And what they reveal will change the way you read Scripture forever.
If you enjoy discovering the history and hidden stories behind Scripture, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next journey into the Bible.
For centuries, skeptics claimed the Bible was just mythology. Beautiful stories, perhaps. Moral lessons, certainly. But history? Never. They said King David never existed. They said the Exodus was a fairy tale. They said the people and places named in the Old and New Testaments were inventions of ancient storytellers, exaggerated across generations until fact and fiction blurred beyond recognition. For a long time, there was no way to prove them wrong. And then the ground began to speak. In the winter of 1946, a Bedouin shepherd named Mohammed F. Deeb was searching the cliffs near the Dead Sea for a lost goat. He threw a stone into a dark opening in the rock, expecting to hear it clatter against stone. Instead, he heard something shatter. Curious, he climbed inside and found clay jars filled with ancient scrolls wrapped in linen, some of them nearly 2,000 years old. He had no idea what he had just found. Neither did anyone else, not yet.
It would take years before scholars understood that this shepherd boy had stumbled onto one of the greatest religious discoveries in human history, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Over the following decade, archaeologists searched 11 caves near the ruins of Qumran and uncovered over 900 manuscripts. Among them were fragments of nearly every book of the Old Testament, some dating back more than 200 years before the birth of Christ. For the first time, scholars could compare these ancient texts to the Bibles used in modern churches, Bibles that had been copied and recopied for 2,000 years. What they found stunned even the most hardened skeptics. The words matched. Not perfectly in every letter, but in substance, in meaning, in message, the Scripture had been preserved with a level of accuracy that seemed almost impossible for a document copied by hand across 2 millennia. The scrolls contained the book of Isaiah in near completeness, the same prophecies of a suffering servant, the same promises of a coming Messiah, word for word as the Bibles read in churches today. The Dead Sea Scrolls did not disprove the Bible. They proved something far more remarkable, that the Word had survived the centuries almost untouched. But the scrolls were only the beginning. Nearly 1,500 miles away, in the hills of northern Israel, archaeologists were digging at a site called Tel Dan when they uncovered a black basalt stone in 1993, broken into fragments, inscribed in ancient Aramaic. It was part of a monument erected by a king who had defeated the armies of Israel.
And carved into that stone, for the first time outside the pages of Scripture, was a name that skeptics said never existed. The stone spoke of the house of David, not a myth, not a legend passed down by scribes wanting to inflate the glory of their nation. A name carved in stone by an enemy king describing the dynasty of a shepherd boy who had once faced a giant with only a sling and 5 stones. For decades, historians had insisted King David was a fictional figure, invented to give ancient Israel a legendary founding king, the way other cultures invented heroes and gods. The Tel Dan Stele silenced that argument in an instant. David was real, his dynasty was real, and someone somewhere in the 9th century before Christ feared that name enough to carve it into stone as a warning to future generations. If David's existence had been debated, so too had the man who condemned Jesus to die. For nearly 2,000 years, the only source confirming that a Roman governor named Pontius Pilate had ever existed was the New Testament itself, along with a few passing references from Roman historians written decades after the events. Some scholars questioned whether the gospel writers had exaggerated his role, or even invented the character entirely to shift blame away from Rome. Then, in 1961, in the ruins of the ancient city of Caesarea Maritima, Italian archaeologists uncovered a limestone block that had been reused as a step in a Roman amphitheater. Carved into its surface, in Latin, was a dedication naming the very man history had questioned, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea.
This stone had been sitting in that theater for centuries, its face turned downward, hidden from view, until the day it was pulled from the earth and turned history on its head. The man who washed his hands of Jesus' blood was not a myth. He held real power in a real province at the exact time the Gospels describe. And it was not just his name that would be confirmed. In 1990, construction workers in Jerusalem accidentally broke through the roof of an ancient burial cave. Inside, archaeologists discovered 12 limestone ossuaries, small stone boxes used to hold the bones of the dead after the flesh had decomposed. One of them, the most ornately decorated of them all, bore an inscription in Aramaic. It read, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas." This was the very man the Gospels name as the high priest who orchestrated the arrest and trial of Jesus, the man who tore his robes in false outrage and declared that Jesus deserved to die. For 2,000 years, his name had been recorded only in Scripture and passing historical references. Now his bones, or the bones of someone in his direct family, rested inside a box excavated from the same city where he condemned an innocent man to the cross. The evidence did not stop at the edges of the New Testament. It reached back, deep, into the earliest chapters of Israel's story. In 1896, 2 French scholars in Cairo purchased fragments of 2 silver scrolls, so fragile and tightly wound that no one dared to open them for decades, afraid the metal would crumble into dust. It was not until 1979 when a young archaeologist named Gabriel Barkay discovered 2 nearly identical scrolls buried in a tomb at Ketef Hinnom, just outside the walls of Jerusalem, that specialists finally developed a technique delicate enough to unroll the silver without destroying it. What they revealed left the scholarly world speechless. Inscribed on the tiny scrolls in ancient Hebrew script was a blessing, almost word for word the same blessing found in the Book of Numbers, the priestly benediction spoken over the Israelites for thousands of years. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you. These scrolls were dated to the 7th century before Christ, making them the oldest known fragments of biblical text ever discovered, centuries older than the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. The words of the Torah were not invented long after the fact. They were being spoken, written, and treasured centuries before most historians believed the text had even been composed. Jerusalem itself seemed to guard secrets in its bedrock. In the 2nd book of Kings, Scripture describes how King Hezekiah, facing the invasion of the mighty Assyrian army, ordered his engineers to carve a tunnel through solid rock to secure the city's water supply, diverting the Gihon Spring underground so that Jerusalem could survive a siege without its enemies cutting off its water. For centuries, this was treated as an impressive but unverifiable detail in an ancient text. Then, in 1880, a boy swimming in the tunnel beneath the old city noticed strange markings carved into the rock wall. It was an inscription, written by the very workers who had dug the tunnel, describing in vivid detail the moment 2 teams of diggers, working from opposite ends of the hillside, broke through the rock and heard each other's voices on the other side. The tunnel described in the Bible was real. You can walk through it today, wading through ankle-deep water in near total darkness, tracing the same path Hezekiah's engineers carved beneath the city nearly 2,700 years ago. Even the earliest chapters of Israel's national identity, the story of a people who once existed as tribes and slaves before becoming a nation, found unexpected confirmation. In 1896, the British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie uncovered a granite stele in Thebes, commissioned by the pharaoh Merneptah around 1208 before Christ. Carved among a long list of Pharaoh's military conquests was a single line describing a people the Egyptians had encountered and defeated. The hieroglyphs read, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is not." It was the first time in history that the name Israel appeared outside the Bible, carved by the very empire that Scripture says once enslaved them. Not evidence of the Exodus itself, but undeniable proof that a people identifying as Israel existed as a recognized group in the land of Canaan by the end of the 13th century before Christ, exactly the era the Bible places the early Israelite settlement. The empires that clashed with Israel throughout the Old Testament left their own testimonies carved in clay and stone, testimonies that again and again echoed the words of Scripture. In the ruins of Nineveh, archaeologists uncovered a six-sided clay artifact known as the Sennacherib Prism, inscribed with the boastful military records of the Assyrian king who besieged Jerusalem during the reign of King Hezekiah. The Bible describes this siege in dramatic detail, describing how the Assyrian army surrounded the city, mocked its God, and then mysteriously withdrew without conquering it, struck by what Scripture calls the hand of the Lord. The Assyrian prism, written from the perspective of the invading king, boasts of trapping Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. And yet, tellingly, the prism never claims that Nineveh actually captured the city. An Assyrian king, recording his own military triumphs to glorify himself, was forced to admit that Jerusalem, alone among all the cities he conquered that year, remained standing. The silence in that stone speaks louder than any boast. A century later, another empire would leave behind a testimony that confirmed one of the most pivotal moments in Israel's history, the end of their exile in Babylon. In 1879, archaeologists excavating the ruins of ancient Babylon uncovered a small clay cylinder inscribed in cuneiform, commissioned by Cyrus the Great after he conquered the Babylonian Empire.
The cylinder describes Cyrus's policy of allowing conquered peoples to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples, a policy of remarkable tolerance for an ancient conqueror. The Book of Ezra records this exact decree, describing how Cyrus permitted the Jewish exiles to leave Babylon and return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple that had been destroyed. For centuries, this decree was known only through Scripture. Then the Cyrus Cylinder emerged from the earth, confirming in the words of a pagan king exactly what the prophets of Israel had recorded. Even the miracles of the Gospels have found their footprints in the ground beneath Jerusalem. In the Gospel of John, Jesus heals a man born blind, sending him to wash in the Pool of Siloam. For centuries, some scholars questioned whether this pool was symbolic rather than a real location, a literary device rather than an actual place. Then, in the year 2004, workers repairing a sewage pipe in Jerusalem's City of David uncovered ancient stone steps leading down into a pool, dated through coins and pottery to the exact time period of Jesus' ministry. The Pool of Siloam was real. It sat exactly where the Gospel of John said it would, in exactly the era the Gospel describes, waiting nearly 2,000 years to be rediscovered. Not every biblical mystery has been so cleanly resolved. Some of the greatest discoveries remain wrapped in controversy and unanswered questions, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Take the search for Noah's Ark.
For centuries, explorers have combed the slopes of Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey, the mountain range where Genesis says the Ark came to rest after the floodwaters receded. Expeditions throughout the 20th and 21st centuries have claimed to find wood, ice formations, and rock structures resembling a hull. Photographs have circulated, documentaries have been produced, and yet, to this day, no claim has been verified by mainstream archaeology as the actual remains of Noah's Ark. Some researchers point to the Durapanar site, a boat-shaped rock formation near Ararat that has drawn both fascination and skepticism in equal measure. Others believe the true resting place has simply not yet been found, buried beneath ice that has held its secrets for thousands of years. The search continues, and perhaps that mystery is not meant to be solved by human hands just yet. Equally debated is the search for Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities Genesis describes as destroyed by fire and sulfur raining from the sky because of their wickedness. In recent years, excavations at a site called Tal el-Hammam in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea have uncovered evidence of a sudden, catastrophic destruction event around 1650 before Christ. Researchers found scorched pottery, melted mud brick walls, and mineral evidence consistent with an intense thermal event, along with human remains showing signs of a violent, instantaneous destruction. Some scientists have proposed that a meteor airburst, similar to the Tunguska event in Siberia, could explain the devastation.
The theory is compelling, but it remains just that, a theory, still debated among archaeologists and geologists, still short of the certainty that would let anyone declare with confidence that this was the very site described in Genesis. What is remarkable is not that every biblical claim has been proven with scientific certainty. Ancient history rarely offers that kind of finality for any civilization, biblical or otherwise. What is remarkable is how often, when the shovel strikes the earth in the lands of Scripture, the names, places, and events described thousands of years ago turn out to be real. A dynasty called House of David, a prefect named Pontius Pilate, a high priest named Caiaphas, a tunnel beneath Jerusalem, a blessing older than the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, a pool where a blind man once washed his eyes and saw the world for the first time. Each discovery, on its own, might be dismissed as coincidence, but together, stone after stone, scroll after scroll, name after name pulled from the dust of the ancient Near East, they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. The Bible was never meant to be treated as mythology, detached from the real world of kings and empires and ordinary people who lived and breathed and left their names carved into stone. It was written as history, poetry, and prophecy woven together, set against the backdrop of real nations that rose and fell exactly where Scripture places them. Every discovery pulled from the dust does not just confirm a date or a name. It confirms that the story was never just a story. Somewhere beneath the sands of the Middle East, more evidence is waiting, sealed in caves not yet opened, buried beneath cities not yet excavated, preserved in scrolls not yet unrolled. And every few years, the ground opens again, and the world is reminded that the oldest story ever told may still have more truth left to reveal than anyone imagined.